people who are joining us. I see that it started recording. I'm Councilor Borrego, District 5. And for the sake of people who have not joined us this evening, we are actually going to put this on YouTube, and questions will be taken by staff if they're not in the chat. If you can put them in the chat, and we will try to do our best to respond to them tonight. This evening, we're joined first by my assistant, Susan B. Hill, who is our Zoom master, I guess, and Diane Dolan. And Diane is one of our City Council staff. And I just add that Diane has done numerous traffic studies, been involved in many traffic issues throughout the city, not just in District 5, but all over the city. So she brings with her a lot of experience, and I'm really delighted to have both of them. And Susan, of course, you guys all know Susan. I wouldn't be doing what I do without her. Tonight we are going to be discussing a study which I initiated for Irving Boulevard. And this is both east and west of Unser Boulevard. And I think without really getting into the issues, we all know that there are issues on that road because of, the proximity of properties and residents to the street itself, walkability, a whole host of issues, including the intersection of Unser and Irving. And then we also have a very large drainage canal right in the proximity, which, in some ways limits things, but in other ways creates opportunities for walkability as well. So the traffic study is really intended to look at Irving Boulevard and really as a traffic calming opportunity, but also to look at, what amenities could we be looking at in the future for walkability, for access, for just a whole host of things, that improvements that could take place in the community. And I know that Peter and Woody and some of you folks have been working on these issues for many years. And I hope that this study will give us some really solid recommendations for how we're going to move forward in the future. We have hired Bohannon Houston, and tonight we have Aaron Sussman with us from Bohannon Houston, and also Claire Haley. Is that right, Claire? And yeah, so they're going to be the people with Diane's help that are going to be implementing the study. There's nothing off the table. And I'm just going to say that because we're going to be looking at a range of recommendations. So, when we complete the study, we're going to have the whole spectrum of recommendations. And then we're going to be looking at the community to advise us as to what are the preferred recommendations, because many of these studies, they give the whole host, the whole spectrum, but with the help of the community, we hope to implement and find the funding to actually, ensure that they are completed. And with that, I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for being with us on this windy evening. What I would say in closing is that I know that you guys are in good hands with the staff and the consultant that we have chosen. And I look forward to those recommendations. We're also going to, knowing that the holidays are coming up, we're also going to have a long period of time to be able to comment on the recommendations of the study. So, it's not going to be something that's going to be fast and furious and let's get it over with. It's going to be something that will be very thoughtful and hopefully thought-provoking as to how we move forward. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my staff and get on to some other things that I've got to work on tonight. So thank you all.
Thank you.
So I will, the council already introduced Aaron Sussman from Bohannon, Houston. So Aaron, I think we can turn the meeting over to you for the presentation. Actually, a couple of technical things real quick for anybody who's not familiar with Zoom. If you're not sure how to use your mic or you would prefer not to speak, if you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a chat option. And if you click on that, a box will open up and you can select who it goes to or send it to everybody. You can send questions, comments via track. We will be, chat, we'll be documenting those and we can answer the questions during this meeting. And then we are also, because we are recording this meeting, we're going to post it online. We're going to make it available for anybody who wasn't able to join us. The presentation itself will also be posted.
I'm losing your audio.
Yeah, Diane, we're having a hard time with your audio. I don't know if maybe turning off the video might help.
Yeah.
Along. Oh. I'm sorry, I just actually disappeared for a moment. And I did want to introduce really quickly our Department of Municipal Development staff that we have joining us tonight. We have Melissa Lozoya and Paula Dodge Kwan, who is the engineering manager, and Tim Brown, who is our traffic engineer. And we are coordinating with them on this study as well.
So Diane, I think we missed some of your audio, so I'm assuming that it's okay for me to jump in now, but.
Oh, not again.
I'm sorry, I apologize. My internet connection is unstable. So I'm actually going to be turning off my video. I don't prefer to do that, but go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you everybody for coming. So I think the counselor did a nice job of introducing the study. So I don't want to belabor that, but let me jump into some sort of general meeting logistics for a moment. And we actually have a good amount of material to share with everybody today. So I appreciate everyone taking the time this evening to join the meeting, and we're excited to share some of our thoughts from the study with all of you. So just a couple of bits of background. You may have noticed that this meeting is being recorded. As the counselor indicated, we'll make this video available online so that other interested individuals can get the same information in the coming weeks and months as well. I have a couple of favors, I suppose, to ask of everybody, or a couple of requests. So the first is for those of you who are attending from the public, if you could sign into the meeting by providing your email in the chat box, your name and your email, that will help us keep track of attendees, and then we can provide any follow-up information that may be relevant to all of you directly. We'll also ask that if you don't mind muting your audio until discussion periods. We will have several periods where we can open things up for questions and comments and discussion. But you can also post a question or comment into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to those comments and questions during those discussion periods. The other bit of information that I want to provide at the outset is that there is a project website, and a lot of information about this project will be loaded onto that website in the coming weeks as well. The website is shown on the screen. It's a bit clunky. Diane, maybe you could copy and paste that into the chat box so that it's easy for anybody who's interested to just click on it directly.
Yes, I will do that. And I will also be sending out a shortened hyperlink after the meeting this week when we have the materials posted, so that anybody who signs in will get that, and anybody who was already on our email list. But I'll go ahead and put it in chat now as well.
Great, thank you. So let me first by recapping what we see as the purpose and need for this study a little bit. We have been specifically contracted to look at roadway and safety conditions along Irving Boulevard between La Paz Drive or Pyrenees Court on the west side of the corridor and Rio Los Piños Drive on the east side of the corridor. So really about 3/4 of a mile on either side of, half a mile to 3/4 of a mile on either side of Unser Boulevard. Our study is particularly focused on traffic calming options along the corridor, ways to reduce vehicle speeds, increase safety for users, and finding and looking for opportunities to improve facilities for bicyclists and pedestrians along Irving Boulevard as well. One particular focal point is the intersection with Irving and Unser Boulevard. As we'll talk through a little bit later on, there are safety issues. There are gaps in the multimodal trail network at that corridor. So we're looking at this both at sort of a linear perspective, but also that key intersection as well. So what we'd like to do this evening is to review the conditions along the corridor. And then we've actually been sort of conceptualizing our analysis and recommendations in two halves along the corridor. And I think it's probably pretty evident for folks who live nearby why we're doing that. Conditions are different, and the recommendations that are emerging are a little bit different as well, depending on the section. So we'll start with a portion of Irving Boulevard to the east of Unser. We'll talk about some general concepts and recommendations. We'll talk about traffic calming options. Then we'll jump across the intersection and talk about Irving Boulevard to the west of Unser, and in particular, how we could improve conditions for pedestrians and look at incorporating sidewalks along the corridor. We also, as I mentioned, will provide a number of opportunities for discussion and in question and answer. So fear not, we will not just be talking at you the whole time. Let me start by just recapping existing conditions a little bit and make sure everybody's on the same page. So again, our study area here is shown in yellow. Things are also color coded a bit on this map. So the blue lines represent where we have existing sidewalks. What you can see is very clearly there are gaps in between the blue lines along our study area. So we have some real sort of needs to be addressed in terms of pedestrian connections. What we show in green are multi-modal or multi-use trails along the corridor. We do not have any current trails east-west along Irving, but we do have trails on the northbound side of Unser, as you can see, but there's a little bit of a gap at the Irving and Unser intersection here. What's shown in this kind of orange-red color is where space exists, or right-of-way exists on the edges of the roadway, where sidewalks could be installed without impacting any of the neighboring parcels. So that creates a little bit more flexibility to the east of Unser Boulevard. So one of the reasons that this study is focusing on traffic calming and looking for opportunities to increase or improve conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians is that the traffic volumes that had been potentially anticipated along Irving Boulevard have not emerged over time. There's parallel facilities that have become much more critical in terms of regional travel. There's still people who use Irving Boulevard to make longer distance connections. But what we see on this table or this chart is that traffic volumes over time have either decreased or held steady, depending on the segment that we're looking at over the last 15, 20 years. So in particular, to the east of Unser Boulevard, what we show in gray, traffic volumes have remained pretty steady, around 10,000 vehicles per day over the last 15 years. But to the west of Unser Boulevard, traffic volumes have actually decreased by more than 50% over the last 15 years. So really what that tells us is that there's an opportunity to focus our energies to a large degree on accommodating bicyclists and pedestrians to a greater degree, and that through traffic, while some of it is taking place, it's certainly not growing. So we can think about how what we really want to prioritize along this corridor. So as I said, let's start with the portion of Irving Boulevard to the east of Unser. Here are a couple of images that we've taken during site visits. So again, as you know, this is a 2-lane roadway. It's pretty narrow. It's about 24 feet from the face of curb to face of curb. Right now, there are no sidewalks or bike lanes along this stretch of the corridor, although you can see in particular on the north side of Irving, tracks that sort of informal trails and tracks that, that people have carved out. Who are walking or traveling along the corridor. There's about 10,000 cars per day, as I mentioned, but that's been a steady traffic volume over time. This portion of the corridor to the north, on the north side, is owned by the city. There's a good amount of real estate there before you get to the escarpment above the Calabasas Arroyo. And this is interesting as well because most of the residential parcels and homes along this corridor, they don't actually open up onto Irving Boulevard. They open up onto side streets or cul-de-sacs. So that's a major contrast with the western portion of the corridor. And that also means that there's potentially some more options and flexibility in terms of recommendations that we might put forward. So again, this is the portion of the corridor that we want to focus on first to the east of Unser. And this is sort of a different way of showing those existing conditions. And so what we have in particular is again, a cross section with a couple of 10-foot travel lanes. We've got a lot of space on the north side of the roadway. The purpose in showing this is to be able to contrast existing conditions against some potential alternatives. One of the things to highlight here is that we do have a decent amount of space between subdivision walls on the south side of the corridor and the curb and gutter. That city owns land and has potential to incorporate sidewalks along that stretch if we're interested. So we wanted to put forward a series of alternatives for discussion here. The first of these alternatives is very simply just putting sidewalks on either side of the corridor, utilizing the space on the south side to introduce sidewalks and landscape buffers. You can do something similar on the north side. This alternative is a little bit more minimal in terms of its improvements or the new facilities that are incorporated along the corridor that minimizes costs. But what we don't see, for example, along this portion of the corridor are on-street bike facilities or trails or anything like that. So we really just have sidewalks on both sides of the corridor. Instead of sidewalks on the north side of the corridor going in the westbound direction, we could actually incorporate a multi-use trail. And we've got a lot of real estate here. You can see that even if we were to add a buffer and a multi-use trail, we still have 30+ feet to the city property boundary on the north side of the corridor. So there's a good amount of land that could be utilized there. Alternatives like the last two keep the curb lines in place, which minimizes costs. But there's a lot of flexibility here too. You could increase or decrease the buffer between the trail and the roadway as one sees fit. A third alternative is if we were to move the curb lines on the north side of the roadway and build, again, that multi-use trail on the north side. So this particular version has sidewalks on one side, a multi-use trail on the other, uses a larger share of that open space on the north side of the corridor. It's a bigger footprint. We have on-street bike lanes, but there's a benefit of that, which is that folks who are traveling higher speeds on a bicycle tend to prefer to be on the street rather than a multi-use trail, where they may come into conflict with people walking their dog, families with kids. And so bicyclists traveling at higher speeds tend to prefer these kinds of on-street bikeway options. So just a quick look of what that could look like to have a multi-use trail on the north side of Irving Boulevard. We've got some other visualizations coming up in a minute, but one of the first ideas that we want to propose here is that this is not because of the amount of right-of-way that we have in the city property line, and the city property line generally falls along this this line here where you can see the vegetation. This does not have to be a perfectly linear trail right up against the roadway. We can do kind of a meandering design if we're interested, because the space exists to do something like that. So I've got a few more visualizations in a moment, but I want to talk about how this corridor then ties in on either end of our study area. So on the east side of the study area, around Rio Los Piños Drive, this is where the roadway transitions into a 4-lane roadway with a wide median, so 2 lanes in each direction. and then the center turn lane or a wide median. This is an interesting portion of the corridor. Median landscaping has been designed, but right now we only have sidewalk on one side of the corridor on the north side that ends right around our study area. And then from a regional standpoint, this is a corridor that's been identified as a road diet candidate by the Mid-Region Council of Governments. So I talked about those traffic volumes earlier. What those traffic volumes tell us is that 10,000 cars a day, we don't necessarily need 2 lanes in each direction to handle that traffic. So the Mid-Region Council of Governments, Mr. Cog has indicated if we wanted to do something, an alternative design with this portion of the corridor to the east of our study area, that's a possibility without affecting traffic operations. At the same time, on the Mr. Cog long-range bikeway system, there are bike lanes, on-street bike lanes that are proposed along this corridor. So there's a potential that to the east of our study area, we may see on-street bike lanes. So it's something to keep in mind as we think about these different alternatives. To the west of this segment, the Irving and Unser intersection, there's a few things that we wanted to highlight here. So these images show the view looking first on the far left, the view looking north along the east side of the corridor, and then the view looking south. So in the south, you see we have a multi-use trail that terminates right before the intersection. The intersection in all 4 corners, or 3 of the 4 corners, looks somewhat like this, where we don't really have that kind of pedestrian connections or infrastructure. We've got crosswalks in place, but the curb ramps or the connections aren't fully there. So there's some obstacles at that location. So another way to look at this intersection is from an overhead view. One of the other considerations is that we have this free right turn, acceleration lane and free right turn for folks traveling westbound on Irving and then going northbound onto Unser. That's a technique that makes a lot of sense if we're trying to facilitate vehicle at really efficiently and at higher speeds. But if we're interested in safety and traffic calming, that actually creates some conflicts with pedestrians. We also have gaps in the multi-use trail network. And so what we show in arrows on the screen are where the multi-use trail ends to the south of the Irving intersection, and then where it begins again on the north side. And in between, we just have kind of a sandy track along the edge of the roadway. So what we have conceptualized as an option, and this is associated with the second and third alternatives, is if we were to introduce a multi-use trail at sidewalk level, we could actually do some really interesting things along this corridor. So one of which is we could, rather than have that free right intersection that facilitates higher speed turns and creates conflicts at the intersection, we could create a T intersection. So we keep that dedicated right turn lane, but folks traveling westbound would then have to make a right turn at a traffic signal rather than just kind of go quickly through the intersection. So that's one measure that we think would have a big benefit in terms of safety. It also creates space for landscaping and trail connections along this corridor. So what we show here again, sort of to the eastern portion of the image is that multi-use trail option at sidewalk level. We have the opportunity again with the available right-of-way for amenities like benches and landscaping, public art even. And then if we bring that multi-use trail connection to the intersection, we can link up with the multi-use trail along the corridor. Because we, under this proposal, can remove that acceleration lane, we now have space that can be utilized for an on-street bike lane going northbound along the corridor. And you can see the striping and buffer that we're proposing as part of that option. So another way to look at it, here's more of a zoomed in look. You can see the connections at the intersection and then implementing this buffered bike lane going northbound. One more way to look at that buffered bike lane, we've got a lot of space on the northbound side of the roadway, and that really creates an opportunity to again implement a multi-use trail at sidewalk level, make those multi-use trail connections, and then implement on-street bike lanes along Unser as well with that underutilized space. So one more way to conceptualize this, because again, this is the corridor right now. We see on the south side of the roadway near this light pole, the space between the subdivision walls and the curb. And then we see all the open space on the north side of the corridor. And this is where, again, I think there's a lot of opportunities to do some interesting things along this corridor that really improve conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians. So that includes, again, a sidewalk where there is none currently on the south side of the roadway, and then a multi-use trail on the north side that can link up with those conditions at or those connections at the Irving and Unser intersection. So this particular image does not show on-street bike lanes, but again, the space exists that if we want to do something similar to this, we could have on-street bike lanes and still apply a kind of similar trail design if we wanted to see that kind of cross-section along the corridor. So I know I went through a lot of that quickly, but let me stop and ask if there's any questions or things that have come up in the chat about these particular options and alternatives. Pete, I see your hand raised, so please.
Yes, it is. I think the residents who are listening from this section of the study area will be delighted to see that installed. And also, let me go back in history a little bit. A number of years ago, this whole thing started with just the western portion of the study area, that is from Unser to La Paz. And at that time, we went door to door, taking a survey of the residents on Irving. And one thing that was clear, a preponderance of them wanted sidewalks on both sides of the street. And I know that many of the residents on the eastern part of the study area wanted the same thing. Part of that is due to the fact that pedestrians unfamiliar with the area get trapped because there are broad sidewalks to the east and to the west of the study area. And they wind up being on foot, walking in the roadway or very close to the roadway, and it's very hazardous. I do think that that's an excellent amendment. And of course, I'm just one person. I hope a lot of us, the residents, are listening and chime in too. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Other thoughts and comments on the alternatives that we've presented so far? And if not, we'll give you more fodder for feedback in a moment. So I see a comment from Woody Woodside saying, very delighted, as Pete said, I like option number 3 with middle turn lane, wider buffer zones would be a safer option. All right, thank you. Any other thoughts and comments before we proceed? All right, so one of the interesting components of this portion of the corridor and the study overall is that, so if the first set of alternatives were about increasing bicycle and pedestrian comfort level and improved infrastructure, then we also have, as part of our charge, to look at ways to reduce traffic speeds and implement traffic calming treatments. So we've got some ideas that we wanted to share with you as well. Before we present those ideas, I just wanted to share a little bit sort of our thinking behind these traffic calming treatments. So one thing that's important to understand is we're looking at treatments and techniques that are appropriate for this type of roadway and given the traffic volume. So things like speed bumps are not an option because of the nature of this corridor. It's classified as a collector roadway that carries a higher number of vehicles and is meant to bring people a little bit longer distances. So it's not appropriate for traffic for speed bumps, but there are other techniques and options along the corridor. The ideas that we've been pursuing are looking for locations that are highly visible, where we can place these treatments in a way that they're spaced to deter speeding, and they can also make sure that we don't impact the roadway too much, that we don't sort of add costs, but that we can also achieve sustained speed reduction over time. So there are some techniques that tend not to have really sort of sustained impacts. Speed feedback signs, for example, is one of those, but things that you do through roadway design tend to have a more sustained impact. So what we're looking at in terms of techniques along this corridor are things that in particular create a narrowing effect. And what this does is sort of makes motorists feel sort of a little bit confined, and they tend to reduce travel speeds as a result. So things that have this effect are medians, street trees. You can adjust travel lane widths as well to create this sort of sense of enclosure or narrowing effect. Another option is to provide lateral shifts so that motorists have to change their trajectory a little bit. If they're not going just in a long straight path, then they tend to drive at slower speeds. So we have a few ideas that we wanted to share that seem appropriate for this corridor. And one of the real keys is that we're looking at options and alternatives that would not limit or impact access to driveways or access to side streets. And I think that we're able to achieve that. We're also looking at techniques that can be sort of spaced out to minimize the amount of speeding up that can occur between these type of techniques. So the first option that we wanted to present are what are called raised medians or diverters. So something like a 6-foot median in the middle of a roadway that pushes traffic to the edges, slows down speeds. These can be 80, 100, couple hundred feet long, go from intersection to intersection without affecting access to the side streets, but having an impact on overall vehicle speeds along the corridor. One thing that's probably worth pointing out is we do have a stop sign as well at Keeping Drive. So, we're looking at combinations of features that either complement or sort of change the way that the traffic control takes place along the corridor, so that we have, again, these sort of sustained traffic calming effects along the length of the corridor. There's some benefits from these types of treatments. Again, this sort of narrowing effect or friction reduces vehicle speeds. As I mentioned, these can be placed to avoid limiting access to side streets, so we can preserve access. We can also incorporate pedestrian crossings into these particular features. So if we do have sidewalks or a multi-use trail on the north side of the corridor, we want to make sure that residents have access to those facilities, and that can be incorporated into the design of these medians or diverters. And then because we've got some physical separation, we have some stretches too where you sort of separate vehicles that are moving in opposite directions, and that can have some safety benefits as well and potentially reduce the risks of head-on collisions. Another type of technique along this corridor that we think would be appropriate would be mini roundabouts or traffic circles. So the image that you see on the upper right is along Silver Avenue, just south of Central in the UNM area. These have mountable curbs so that emergency vehicles can maneuver through this intersection pretty easily. And there's a number of locations along this corridor where these mini roundabouts or traffic circles could be applied. What we're showing on the screen is meant to be a concept. We're not saying that this is exactly how they would or could be placed, but just to show that you could do sort of nicely spaced out medians or mini roundabouts or traffic circles to have a sort of consistent and regular traffic calming effect along the corridor. The way that these work is, again, because vehicles are forced to make a slower approach and change their trajectory, reduce speeds. We can also integrate pedestrian crossings, again, as part of these mini roundabouts or traffic circles. And then one other point to mention here is that this is a technique that can be combined with other traffic calming features. So the other way to think about this is, it's not an either or. You could do some kind of combination thereof with median diverters and then multiple traffic circles or mini roundabouts as well to, again, have this sort of sustained traffic calming effect. So this concept here shows a combination of median diverters and mini roundabouts. And the way that this is set up is now there's no more than 300 to 400 feet maximum between some sort of traffic calming feature. So we really can keep have a sustained impact on driver behavior across the length of the corridor. One other point to mention here is that the stop sign at Keeping Drive, which is a little bit of an awkward stop sign, is actually something that could be replaced with a mini roundabout or traffic circle. Stop signs are not meant to be used as traffic calming devices. There's a little bit of a sort of intersection site issues related to that particular location, but introducing something like a mini roundabout could make that intersection function a little bit better, and certainly eliminates the risk that somebody just plows through the stop sign. And again, there's lots of flexibility now with some of these types of options in terms of pedestrian crossings. So this is another point where we wanted to stop and ask for questions. So I see one comment in the chat. Woody, it looks like you sent me a direct message. Before we get to that, Melissa, I suspect you, I hope I characterized things accurately, but I see your hand up. So if you want to jump in, that would be great.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, Aaron. So you said the traffic calming measure or feature could be placed 300 or 400 feet apart. Is that true to the mini roundabout or traffic circle? Would those be placed at that interval?
So what we're showing here is 300 to 400 feet between these different traffic calming features, not necessarily 300 to 400 feet between traffic control. So, or like a stop control, like a mini roundabout. So, and that's a question that we may need to go back to our engineering staff to talk through a little bit more. What we show on this depiction is more like 800 feet between the mini roundabouts or traffic circles. That's more consistent with what we have along some of the bike boulevards and around like UNM and on Silver Avenue. So yeah, I think the point here was the spacing between the traffic calming devices, not necessarily between like stop control or traffic control devices.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So Woody asks, it appears the narrowing effect really creates more safety thinking to the driver. If so, a turn lane may not be needed. So Woody, that's correct. That's part of the idea, especially with these mini roundabouts or traffic circles, is that it does become much easier to navigate or make those turns without coming into more significant conflicts with opposing traffic. So that is one of the benefits associated with these kind of devices. Other thoughts or comments?
I'm actually just wondering, it occurred to me that the traffic calming would interfere with that, with people needing to back out with large recreational trailers. But these houses don't front onto the road in the same way as the other section, correct? They're more.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have these kind of interesting small little cul-de-sacs in portions of the corridor. But those are all homes that back out, where the driveways back out onto the cul-de-sac rather than onto Irving Blvd directly.
Oh.
I think if they're placed then so that they don't interfere with all options to back out those giant recreational pieces, trailers, then it works.
And I saw a physical hand raised. It looked
Yes.
like you have, go ahead.
I know for this section that the residents in the cul-de-sacs forever have been bitterly complaining about being held captive in them and not being able to actually drive out onto Irving because of the traffic. And basically, I'm speaking for them because I've heard these complaints for many years, and a lot of them. It's because of originally when this was developed, there was very little traffic on Irving, but it's gotten to where they're held prisoner in their cul-de-sacs, and I'm sure if more of them were actually had their mics on and able to comment on this, I'm sure you'd hear that. So that I'm just voicing it for them. That's it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, and hopefully, we're able to share these materials and share the presentation with additional residents and get some additional feedback. I guess what I'll say is, none of these alternatives or options are set in stone by any sense yet, but what we've tried to present are options that, like I said, that I said at the beginning, our charge here is to look at enhanced bicycle and pedestrian connections, and then traffic calming features, and way that we can do that, and have that, like I said, a sustained traffic calming effect in the long term. And if that also means that we can create better opportunities for residents to access in and out of those cul-de-sacs and side streets, then I think that sounds like a nice, important co-benefit as well. And I've got a comment from Woody voicing support for the mini roundabouts as a way to improve access to those side streets and cul-de-sacs. So thank you for speaking to that as well.
And you would also see traffic counts decline on these sections of Irving by people that are just in a hurry and don't want to maneuver.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. We can't guarantee that, but what I think that we can do with traffic calming is we can ensure that motorists making through trips along the corridor are forced to navigate these devices that do force them to reduce their speeds to some degree. Okay, well, generally hearing some support for mini roundabouts. And any concerns about a combination of options? Any concerns about the median diverters as a concept?
I would just point out that the median diverters seem to allow access to all the cul-de-sacs at the same time calming traffic. It looks like an excellent solution to me, but I don't live in that part of Irving.
Sure, no, thank you. I guess I'll just say that that's very much the intent and why we've indicated the locations that you see on the screen is that can be done in a way that does not limit access, but does have that traffic calming effect. The other point that I want to mention is that we do show on these layouts how this would impact the configuration of the roadway a little bit. So the curbs on the north side would likely need to be moved a little bit to accommodate these traffic calming features. But if we do that sort of selectively, it's not nearly as invasive or as disruptive in terms of construction. The other point is that these are all traffic calming devices that could be built in ways that also work alongside on-street bike lanes if we wanted to pursue that option. It would obviously require widening the roadway to a greater extent to accommodate both the bike lanes and the traffic calming devices. But that real estate exists essentially. So this is not a set of concepts or options that preclude on-street bike lanes. Another comment from Woody, and again, thank you. The ideas presented so far are very good. Traffic signs are really suggestions. And I think that's a real challenge that, again, why I think it makes sense to look for design options that have a different effect or impact here. So let me move along now to the portion of the corridor to the west of Irving, I'm sorry, the west of Unser. So this is the final portion of our presentation here. And this is a section that does have some interesting alternatives that we wanted to share with you. And we're looking forward to the discussion on this one as well. So the images that you're seeing here, Irving Boulevard to the west of Unser, as I mentioned, a little bit of a different set of characteristics. So again, 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, but here we have a continuous center turn lane. The traffic volumes are actually quite a bit lower, 6,000 cars per day versus 10,000 on the eastern portion. We also have on-street bike lanes along this portion of the corridor, but generally they're pretty narrow, sometimes as little as 3 to 3.5 feet, and never more than about 4.5 feet on both sides of the roadway. Ideally, we like to have bike lanes that are at least 5 feet and wider than that, again, if possible. There are sidewalks on portions of the south side of the corridor, but only portions of the corridor. And then those sidewalks are also pretty narrow, only about 4 feet in width. Unlike, again, the eastern portion of our study area, here we have driveways and residential access directly on to Irving itself. So this has been designated as a residential area. Again, really different dynamics in terms of turning movements. One other dynamic along this corridor is that the city right-of-way actually extends into the properties on the north side of the roadway. And that's a kind of a quirk that impacts our alternatives to some degree, and are thinking about what might be the best way to improve conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians along the corridor. So we also wanted to point out that where we do have sidewalks along this corridor, we do have some conditions that I think are ripe for improvement. So one is we've got a lot of overgrown vegetation, but we also have really narrow sidewalks. We have obstacles approaching the intersection at Irving. So there's definitely, at Irving and Unser, so there's definitely some opportunities here to improve conditions for pedestrians along the extent of the corridor. So what we've developed are 2 options to present here for incorporating sidewalks along the corridor. I also want to mention and speak to this before we get into the alternatives, that we are not showing, as part of this presentation tonight, traffic calming techniques for Irving to the west of Unser. But those may be considered. But what type of techniques for traffic calming, that depends to some degree on what the preferred alternative is, or the preferred means of incorporating sidewalks along the corridor. We also, whatever we do, again, our objective is going to be to maintain access to local streets and residential parcels. So that's one sort of our overarching objectives or principles before we talk about the different alternatives. So let me start with the portion closer to Unser Boulevard. This is a portion that has sidewalks on the south side of the roadway, but again, no sidewalks on the north side. So this graphic shows existing conditions. We see the bike lanes, 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction, and then continuous 2-way left turn lane. We have, again, 4-foot sidewalks on the south side, and then a landscape buffer that's a little bit overgrown for sure, but we do have that, those pieces of infrastructure in place. So what we wanted to present are 2 alternatives for installing or implementing sidewalks along the extent of the corridor. So the first of these options would be to build sidewalks outside of the curb lines. So under this approach, we keep the existing curbs where they are, we keep the center turn lane as it is, and then we build sidewalks, and especially on the north side, utilizing the space that's along these neighborhood or that's along the neighboring parcels. We can make some minor tweaks to the striping to make these bike lanes up to 5 feet. But the major component of this is building sidewalks, again, kind of alongside the roadway, outside of the curb lines and into those residential lots. I see a couple of comments coming in, and I know that this is going to be a kind of ripe topic for discussion. So let me go back and sort of talk through these alternatives a little bit more, and then we want to provide some time for discussion. So the second alternative is, and so this is an example of what this could look like. So, you know, we are talking about moving into, or this alternative does involve utilizing that space along the residential parcels. And so that just wanted to be very clear that that's a component of this alternative. And this is kind of what we're talking about in terms of the length of, or the amount of width of space that that would be involved with building outside of the existing curb lines. The other alternative is to keep the existing curb lines where they are and to build into the roadway and take away the 2-way left turn lane. So this would allow us to utilize that, again, that center turn lane space and reallocate that to widen bike lanes, put in some small buffers between the bike lanes and travel lanes, and to build a sidewalk starting where the curb line currently exists and then building into the roadway. Again, this does remove the center turn lane. That can have a traffic calming effect, but it does create potentially some conflicts for people making turning movements into driveways if there's oncoming traffic. Now, keep in mind though, we've got only about 5,000 or 6,000 cars per day along this portion of the corridor. in some respects, having those sort of turning movements and forcing vehicles to slow down while somebody's making a turn, that itself has a traffic calming effect along with narrowing the roadway. So there's definitely sort of some pros and cons of these different alternatives. The far western portion of our study area, where we do not have sidewalks at all along the corridor, this is again where, so this is existing conditions, again, narrow bike lanes, a travel lane in each direction, a two-way left turn lane. Here we do not have sidewalks on either side, but we do have what is city right-of-way on both sides of the street. So one of the options again is to utilize that city space, that city right-of-way along the neighboring parcels to build these sidewalks. If we can do this in a way that if we, again, are looking at, this kind of keeps the curb lines in place, which minimizes costs, but we're also talking about then utilizing that space that's currently landscaping and kind of in practice used as part of the residential parcels. The other option again here is to build sidewalks into the roadway. And it's a little bit narrower here in terms of the footprint, so we don't have as much space for things like landscape buffers, and we've got narrower bike lanes, but we can sort of build out this roadway section with sidewalks on both sides if we take away the center turn lane and again, utilize that space that we save essentially to build sidewalks into the roadway and make sure we've got bike lanes of sufficient width. So that's the last sort of piece of alternatives that we wanted to present this evening, and I'm certain that this will lead to more discussion. So let me go back to the comments from Woody, who asserts that we need more traffic calming and pedestrian enhancement west of Irving. It's extremely dangerous from a speeding standpoint, and then obviously he's got concerns about landscaping that would be impacted. I'm sorry, not from Woody, that was from Robert Carnell. So thank you, Robert, for putting your thoughts in there. Other thoughts or comments?
I'm going to start on a positive note.
Okay.
A mini roundabout at the intersection with La Paz and Pyrenees would be a superb idea. You might also consider it where Paseo del Norte comes in, because that's where the school buses turn, and it's also where elementary school children cross the road. But let's talk about Irving between Unser and Paseo. On the north side of the road, the city does not have that the right-of-way it claims on a number of lots, and all lots in that part of Irving on the north side have a 7-foot utility easement for sure, 7 feet from the existing curb. Some lots own almost to unencumbered. They own unencumbered, according to their plats, land almost to that easement. In many cases, they own within 9 feet or more, or 9 feet or less. Each lot owns a different degree, but it would be an easy matter to observe that 7-foot utility easement, and you could put in a 4-foot sidewalk and a 5-foot utility easement there. Building a sidewalk right next to the curb would obviate the utility easement. So that's a problem. West of Paseo, almost every lot does not own land that close to the curb. Most of those lots have a property line on their south side that would actually allow what the city had originally claimed is their right-of-way width. That means they would have only 20 feet, a 20-foot setback. And part of that problem is that large recreational vehicles couldn't be parked in there. In fact, a crew cab pickup couldn't be parked in their parking lots. So this was a hot topic that it was beat to death years ago. Every possible option was discussed ad infinitum. So I just wanted to bring up also, you know, talking about speed bumps. What about this was a proposal that never got discussion a couple of years ago. How about speed bumps just in the turn lane, the center turn lane? And one of the residents on the north side is actually an EMT for the county. And one of the stock answers we got on speed bumps was, oh, well, the emergency vehicles would jar their injured passengers too much. But he has decades of experience, and he says that that's not true. He was evidently an ambulance driver himself, and they were trained to handle speed bumps. But if there were only speed bumps in the turn lane, that would be obviated. And one of the problems is that we have scofflaws screaming down that turn lane, doing 50 miles an hour to 25-an-hour speed limit, and that is a perennial problem. And speed bumps only in the turn lane would allow utility trucks and maintenance trucks to park there, to park or stop there without a problem. And I'm going to stop right there because I can tell you have some answers to that, Aaron.
Well, I'm going to actually ask one of the city municipal development representatives if you could speak to thoughts on speed bumps on a street such as Irving Boulevard.
Yeah, that was never resolved. That was brought up years ago. Never resolved.
Yeah, I can handle that one, Aaron. Everyone, this is Tim Brown. I'm the traffic engineering division manager, and my division is responsible for the neighborhood traffic management program, the NTMP. So loosely, that's the program that installs traffic calming on residential type roads. It is city policy to not put speed humps on emergency response routes, regardless of what your experience is with the ambulance driver that you knew. Based on feedback that we have gotten from our EMS professionals with Albuquerque Fire Rescue, they do not like speed humps on roads that they need to use to access a broad area. So, like I say, your experience may be different, but we are following and do our best to follow the wishes from AFR to not install speed humps on roads that function as emergency response routes.
Let me say that's the most complete answer on that issue we've ever got. Thank you.
So Pete, let me also just say we've got a record of all of your comments. It's being recorded, and we've got a transcript of it. So it's there's other comments in there that we can ponder over. I appreciate the thoughts about mini roundabouts at La Paz and Paseo del Norte. So I thank you again for sharing those thoughts, and as well as all the input about the utility easements and so forth.
Aaron, this is Diane.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could make a comment real quick, or ask somebody at municipal development to maybe help us out with respect to the easement questions. The right-of-way questions, I think obviously it's something that would have to be revisited at a later date. But with respect to those easements, I believe we can build sidewalks over utility easements. I think we have alleys through which utility easements run, but could somebody from municipal development, maybe Paula, give us a better response on that? If there are 7-foot easements behind the curb, would that impact our ability to do sidewalks and or a landscaping buffer with a sidewalk?
My understanding, Diane, is that you're correct, that if we have an easement there, we shouldn't need to, it shouldn't impact our ability to put in sidewalks. Melissa, do you know anything different than that?
No, that's correct. We can utilize that space to put in sidewalks and landscaping. We just can't have any type of structures in those kinds of easements.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then the other thing I wanted to respond to from Pete's comments, and thank you for those, Pete, regarding the roundabouts. That is actually one of the things that that they are charged with considering in this study. The 2 intersections you mentioned, and I think there was one other. They're also going to, in addition to many roundabouts, they will be considering other traffic calming options that were discussed for the other side. But those are what's available to us is going to depend somewhat on which of these sidewalk options that the community decides that they prefer. You know, if either. We did know that this particular issue was probably going to be the biggest topic of discussion. We understand that there were going to be concerns about either option. But we have also seen, you know, over and over again through the years of communications that we've reviewed, that there are a lot of people in the area who are wanting sidewalks in the west of Unser there. So it was something we needed to take a look at. These are the only 2 options. Both of them are not ideal for everybody. So we do hope this conversation will continue. And just again, to reiterate, we will also be considering additional traffic calming options for this segment west of Unser, but we really have to sort of get a better idea of which of the sidewalk options the community prefers. And that's all I had.
In the chat, Robert has voiced voice support for the second option. And so in particular, the second option is the version where we build into the street. Any other thoughts or comments on these different alternatives?
I would just say if that second option is chosen to, that the placement, well, of any traffic calming, should that be included, would be key to people's use of the roadway.
Thanks, Susan. Robert follows up with a question. Is there, if there is an easement, will owners be compensated for the loss of property in landscaping?
So I'll try to tackle that, and then I'll ask our municipal development staff also to help out if I'm missing anything. So my understanding of the right-of-way situation, and I'm not in a position to, you know, to advocate or in any way debate, and I don't want to start that. My understanding of the information I've been provided is that the city does have right-of-way north, on the north side, that could accommodate sidewalks and even a buffer. That being said, we also recognize that that area has been used from a practical standpoint and historically by property owners as part of their front yard. Should the community decide that they prefer the option where the sidewalks are being built outside of the existing curb and gutter, based on my understanding, and again, this is just information. I'm not a real estate professional. I haven't seen the right-of-way surveys. I'm not an engineer, but if indeed that is city right-of-way, we would have to remove encroachments, but we would not be allowed under law to replace those because they were on city property to begin with. If there's state or federal funding involved, it actually becomes even more stringent, but we would not be allowed to compensate if it's determined that those encroachments are on city property. We are not allowed to compensate for their removal. If the city did not have or own the necessary right-of-way, then we would be able, our only alternative then would be to purchase the right-of-way. Even if that area was condemned, the city still has to pay fair market value for whatever property is taken for the purpose, for that purpose. So at this point, I can't say that we have, I don't have enough, knowledge or documentation of what the right-of-way issues are. Our engineering staff might have more, but if it's an encroachment, if it's determined that that is actually city right-of-way, and we have to remove an encroachment to build sidewalks, we would not be allowed. We would not legally be allowed to replace those encroachments. And I do see a question from Robert. So if it belongs to the owners, his question is, what if it belongs to the owners that have cared for it since 1962, or 72? If it belongs to the owners, then the city would not be able to just go out there and remove, whatever is there and build sidewalks. We would have to either acquire that right away from the owner. Throughout the city, our ordinance stipulates that property owners are responsible for the sidewalks adjacent to their property, as well as any landscaping strip, even if it's in the city right away between the sidewalk and the roadway. So all over the city, folks that have that condition are responsible for maintaining that landscape strip. They can maintain it with nothing as long as it's free of weed and litter. But their maintenance of that area, their care of that area does not convey any sort of ownership rights. And even if it's a wall, even if somebody were to build a wall that is within the city right of way, that does not convey any ownership rights to them. So again, it goes back to the question of ownership, and I am not qualified to really speak to that, but that is something we would have to pursue if the preferred option is outside of the street, the existing street. Those are all details we would have to pursue before proceeding to any sort of design phase. And I don't know if anybody from municipal development has any additional comments on that.
I don't, Diane. I think you summarized it very well. Thank you.
Might I suggest that in order to resolve this issue, the city actually peruse the plats of those lots on the north side of Irving between Unser and Paseo. That's never been done.
I do know that some, I don't know, again, I don't know all of the research, but I do know that the real problem.
Whoops, lost audio.
Yeah, Diane, we're losing your audio again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Reese, are you suggesting that the city survey the area and have it?
No. What I'm suggesting is that the city actually investigate the plats that the homeowners And you know, when they bought the property, they receive a plat. Now the thing is, in Paradise Hills, there are probably less than 10 private properties that have a recorded survey. But nonetheless, every homeowner, you know, upon acquiring the property gets a plat. And the plat indicates the property lines and also easements. And a number of these appear to conflict sometimes enormously with the city claimed as their right-of-way. But the city has never actually asked for those plats, to my knowledge, or even looked at them, even thought about it, even though we brought this up before.
So Pete, I can't really speak directly to that. I do know that real property and municipal development, I don't know how far along they got in this, but back in the days when there was the idea was to widen the roadway, I think at least some of that right-of-way surveying got done. And again, I'm not familiar with the details of that. It's certainly something we would have to revisit. I don't know if right-of-way survey includes looking at those plats, but all of this really just sort of, I think, points to some of the challenges that we would have with this option. We would have to look into all of these details of property lines. We do understand that there's, you know, some disagreement between what was presented in the past and like you said, records that residents have. So it's not something we would overlook if we did this option. It would just be a complication that we would have to work through to pursue this.
Yeah, it would be nice to put this issue to rest.
Hey, baby, I'm in a public meeting.
So I'm going to interject and move to one other question that came up in the chat on a little bit of a different subject. So Elizabeth Haley asked about the paved path indicated on Unser and linking with Irving. Is that planned? And so if you're asking about what we're showing here and here in particular, these are proposed facilities that we have identified as an option associated with the study. Part of the logic for that alternative is the gap in the existing trail network, where we have a trail on the north side of Irving and on the south side. So that's a gap that obviously I think could be filled, but doing the manner in which we're proposing that it becomes linked as part of a trail network is a proposal as part of the study. So Elizabeth, I hope that answers your question.
It does. I just came out of a meeting with Bernalillo County concerning sound attenuation walls between Irving and Paradise Hills Boulevard. And so I guess what I'm trying to determine is how much room is actually left in the right-of-way, because that also implicates the issue that we were discussing with the county. Did anyone hear that? Am I unmuted?
No, you're live.
Okay, that was the that's what I'm saying. Is that I wondered how schematic this is and whether or not someone has if it is based on again a real property line study when what used to be Lyons and now is Irving, between Irving, excuse me, and now Unser, which is between Irving and Paradise Boulevard, when they did those widening efforts, they did the walls that are, there's a wall on the west side that's being proposed, but there was probably as great a need on the east side. It's just simply that the data that they were using at the time was from 2016. The traffic studies and then the sound study was from 2018. So as it moves forward and the city continues its lane widening, it's going to be a probable fact that that stretch of road is going to have greater noise levels, because it was very close to qualifying on the east side for sound attenuation during the 2018 study. That's why I'm trying to get kind of a handle on how the county and the city are coordinating their respective projects. And I love the complete streets. I love linking up the pathways. There's nothing that I'm seeing here that isn't an enhancement to the community, but I'm just concerned having that everybody is working off the same data. Is there any response?
I think what you're describing is you're concerned about noise from widening unserved Boulevard.
No, that is not what
Okay.
That's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is that there are existing plans that are impacted by the right of way. Like where are sound attenuation walls going to be placed? Are they going to have to be farther inside, and is the roadway going to have to be expanded in order to place them and still have enough amenities left in the right of way to have things like sidewalks, etc.? And so I'm just wondering how there can be some coordination between the kind of plans that the county has to take care of one issue and the plans to do these more complete street approaches that seem to be coming out of the city planning.
Yeah. Hi, ma'am. My name is Paula Dodge Quantum with the city of Albuquerque. I don't think that we are aware of what the county's plans are for this area. So we can ask them what they have and maybe get a copy of their plan set. But yeah, no, we haven't seen them.
That's great, because in the next month, we're trying to sort of coordinate a final plan for the west side of Irving and where these walls are going to actually be located. And it would be great to be able to coordinate both the efforts from the city and the county. So thank you. That would be wonderful. Is it possible to send contact information to us?
For the county?
No, to the Paradise Hills Special Zoning Commission.
Contact information for the county?
No. I just walked out of a meeting with the county. I have their information. What I'm saying is, can you send the proposed plans that we're looking at here? Could the Paradise Hills Zoning Commission be able to get copies of those? Because we are meeting with the county, because the reason we're meeting and coordinating with them is that some of the plans for this area may have to extend into private property. And of course, we're the zoning entity for all projects on private property.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Elizabeth. And also thank you very much for bringing that effort to our attention. So yes, there will be a PDF of this presentation posted to the project webpage. I did copy the link into the chat earlier, but I'll also be sending up a follow-up email this week to everybody who got the notification, but also anybody who's provided their email address during this meeting. I'll be sending out a follow-up email this week that gives you a little bit, a hyperlink that's a little shorter that people can just click on. And we will have at that time the PDF of this presentation posted at the website. That's, public record. You can share that with the county. And we'll also actually have this video of the meeting posted at the website. And I will reach out as well to the county to make sure that we're talking with the right people on their effort to coordinate this project with any of the efforts they're making in the area. And again, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
I think the other important thing to remember is that these are just conceptual plans. They're not real yet. We're waiting to, we're trying to get public comment and all of that going as well. So I don't think we have any actual plans. These are just schematics and ideas.
That's that's okay. I mean, I have a master's in architecture. I understand what schematics, the limits of schematics, but I think since we're going to be talking about putting down some very finite structures, and the county doesn't, although it looks like that you're using the same consultant, Bohan in Houston, it would be great to get the kind of amenities that you're showing in these schematic plans, more complete streets, as well as to be able to deal with the sound attenuation wall. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask Elizabeth if you don't mind putting your email in the chat. So that's how we're asking people to sort of check in and record their attendance. But thank you for the comments and for bringing, again, that matter to our attention.
I'm doing that now.
All right, I see one last comment from Robert about unserved between Irving and McMahon also needing sound walls. Megan, thank you. We'll recording that comment as part of the transcript for the meeting this evening. Let me just speak really fast to kind of our next steps. I think we're again looking for more feedback and your help in terms of spreading information about this project and helping to generate more comments is really important because we do not have alternatives set in stone yet. They're in need of further refinement, but ultimately we'll look to put forward recommendations into the study report, which is under development, and then we'll also provide some thoughts on phasing and cost estimates. So I just wanted to speak to the fact that this is very much in progress, and all of your feedback is really important and appreciated. We're almost up to 7:30, and I know that I think we were scheduled just till either 7 or 7:30. So I want to be respectful of people's time. Any last questions or comments before we wrap up for the evening?
Yeah, I have one quick comment. You know, that portion of Irving where we were talking about unencumbered land ownership, that was platted and replatted a bewildering number of times. I do believe I have plats for subdivision plats for every time it was replatted. If somebody wants to consult me on that, I can provide it.
Thank you, Pete. That might come in handy in the future.
Okay.
Also, I just wanted to reiterate one more time, you have my email address up here on the screen. I'll be sending out another email when the web page is updated. People can have the opportunity to email me through that web page or directly. We're going, as the counselor mentioned when she opened the meeting, we're going to be giving lots of time, lots of opportunity for folks to comment. We want to hear from as many people who are interested in commenting to us. So we do encourage you and ask your assistance in making sure we get the word out to the community about this webpage so that they can learn about the project and give us their feedback.
All right, Diane, any last thoughts? Or from my perspective, I just want to thank everybody for your comments and thoughts this evening. This has been great in terms of developing these alternatives and being able to talk through them with all of you. So thank you again for taking the time this evening.
Thank you, Aaron, and everybody, for the public. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciated this meeting.
Thank you to our municipal development.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right.
You too.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.